Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Grand Line's online salon. I'm Roma, communications coach from Grand Line Philippines. And let me introduce to you my lovely partner today, and once again, my guest co-host, Ms. Florence Rivera. Ms. Florence is a graduate of the University of the Philippines and the former general manager and co-founder of 51 Talk and the former director of human resources of Go Fluent. Currently, Secretary General travel agencies are known as NITAS, and the founder and CEO of Travel Bag Philippines. Welcome back to the program, Ms. Florence.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me again, Ms. Roma. I'm excited to start our discussion of today's online salon.
And it's always a pleasure hosting with you, Florence. And this program, we feature several social issues that will allow the speakers to share their expertise. The students who are part of the audience will have also the fair share of questions at the end of the discussion.
We will be asking them about the main topic, and at least 2 speakers will be given time to state their points. Just a friendly reminder, kindly set your microphone on mute unless it's your turn to speak. Let's begin.
Yes, and let's start now. So the history of the Chinese presence in the Philippines dates back to pre-Hispanic times, all the way back to the 19th century. But it was the establishment of Manila as a Spanish colonial port in 1571 that fueled trade with China on an unprecedented scale. The Manila to Acapulco galleon trade attracted Chinese products to and from the Philippines, bringing silk and other luxuries in exchange for native goods. With that is also the massive influx of the Chinese. By the end of the 16th century, around 30,000 Chinese, mostly single males, lived in colonial Manila, and they far outnumbered the 2,000 plus Spaniards. Nearly all the Chinese came from the coastal areas of southern Fujian. Fujian province is actually divided into 2. Part of it is claimed by the Republic of China or Taiwan, and another part is being claimed by the People's Republic of China or mainland Communist China. Virtually all Filipino Chinese belong to either Hokkien or Cantonese-speaking groups of the Han Chinese ethnicity.
That's right, Ms. Roma. The Spanish divided the Chinese into 2 groups: Parian, or the unconverted, and Binondo, means converted. Many Chinese converted to Catholicism and intermarried with local women and adopted Hispanized names. The children of unions between Filipinos and Chinese were called Chinese mestizos, while those between Spanish and Chinese were called tornatras. Most Chinese originally occupied the Binondo area, although they spread all over the islands, especially in the Visayas. Some Chinese families who fled southern China in the 18th century sailed farther south and landed at the port near La Villa Rica de Arevalo, in what we now know as Iloilo City.
History is indeed very intriguing. Fast forward to 1945, the Filipino-Chinese identity was said to have been solidified during World War II, when both Chinese migrants and Filipino guerrillas fought a common enemy, and guess who? The Japanese imperial forces. Thousands of Chinese soldiers and Filipino guerrillas died of heroism in the Philippines from 1941 to 1945 during World War II. It was that war that served as catalyst for the Chinese to integrate themselves in Filipino society and regard the Philippines as their new home.
That is a very interesting piece of history, Miss Roma. The Philippines and China go back a long way indeed, and the history is as rich and colorful as you can imagine. Under the martial rule of Ferdinand Marcos, Chinese Filipinos who have citizenship, those who arrived before World War II, were called Lao Cao. I'm not sure about the pronunciation. Those who arrived after the war were called the Ju Kiao. They were overstaying aliens and residents who came from China via Hong Kong in the 50s to the 80s. Then the third wave of Chinese migrants came. They are known as Xin Chao, tourists or temporary visitors with fake papers or even fake Philippine passports. They said to have started coming in the 90s during the time of President Fidel Ramos and Joseph Estrada. More were given citizenship during the pro-China presidency of Gloria Arroyo. During the term of former President Benigno Aquino, several businesses by the Filipino-Chinese community got bigger, but mainland Chinese immigration decreased due to Aquino's pro-Filipino stand in handling disputes with mainland Communist China. It was also during this time when the Republic of the Philippines filed a case against the People's Republic of China at the Permanent Court of Arbitration, where we won, and China's historic 9-dash claim was declared to have no validity under international law.
And of course, the plot thickens, Ms. Florence. Under the current administration, Xinqiao Chinese migration from mainland China into the Philippines intensified from 2016 up to the present due to the controversial pro-PRC policies of President Duterte, downplaying the West Philippine Sea issue and prioritizing the Philippine offshore gaming operators or POGOs, online gambling firms which operate in the Philippines but caters to customers outside the country. POGOs are licensed by the Philippine Amusement and Gaming Corporation or the PAGCOR. All these issues and controversies related to Chinese-Philippines relations have exploded even more due to the COVID-19 pandemic, with practically the whole world now blaming PRC or Communist China for the spread of the virus and for taking advantage of the situation.
What a sizzling topic we have here today, Ms. Roma. So we have invited distinguished speakers to discuss with us some of these controversies, and we are very excited to hear what they have to say. So let's begin by introducing our speakers.
Yes. So it's an honor to welcome our first guest speaker, Attorney Christy Jane Balino. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and cum laude at University of the Philippines, Manila. She's also a consultant at Commission on Elections and Labor Compliance Officer. And at the same time, she's a private practitioner in Manila. She's currently a professor of law at Arellano University School of Law. And again, let's welcome Attorney Christy Jane Balino.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Attorney Balino.
Yeah, sure.
And it's also my pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Attorney and Dean Rodel Taton, a professor of law at UST, San Sebastian College, and PUP. He's also a former consultant of the UN Food Agriculture Organization for Alternative Dispute Resolution in the Philippines. He holds a Doctor of Civil Law with specialization on public international law, intellectual property, and civil litigation. He's also a bar reviewer and mandatory continuing legal education lecturer. He is currently the Dean of the Graduate School of Law of San Sebastian College, Recoletos, Manila. Also a political science major from the University of the Philippines, a TV host, and my batchmate. Good afternoon and welcome to the program, Attorney Dr. Dean Rodel Taton. Hi, Dean. Dean?
Hi,
You
everyone.
hear me good. Oh, there you
Sorry.
go.
Yeah, there. I'm so excited to speak because of your very good introduction. But thank you very much for inviting me here in your program. Thank you, Roma, for considering us here for this very good topic. The topic appears to be very interesting, and there was a historical aspect and the modern aspect as well. So we are very glad to be part of the show.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, Dean. And we're so happy to have you here. Okay, and we're also happy to introduce to you our guest from Grand Line. Our guest from Grand Line, Mr. Koji Takabuchi. He's a quality control officer at Rionan Electric Philippines, and it's nice to see you here, Mr. Takabuchi, and welcome to our program.
Hello, Koji-san. Okay, I think he's muted. So let's begin.
Okay, well, I guess we will have Mr. Kabuchi later, and we will have Mr. Takabuchi. Yes, we will have yes, of course, we will have Mr. Takabuchi later during the Q&A session. For now, let's just enjoy the discussion.
Okay, so in 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration made a milestone decision by declaring that China's so-called 9-dash line in the entire South China Sea is illegal. Mm-hmm. The tribunal's award said that its large-scale land reclamation activities in the Spratly Islands had caused severe harm to the coral reef environment and violated its obligation to preserve and protect fragile ecosystems and the habitat of depleted, threatened, or endangered species. Chinese fishermen in the South China Sea were exploiting endangered species on a substantial scale, the tribunal said. Yet the Communist China rejected the International Court's decision, sending more warships in Scarborough Shoal and the Spratly Islands. A multitude of nations backed the tribunal's ruling, including Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Japan, United States, as well as claimants, Malaysia and Vietnam, and many, many others. So after winning the historic maritime case against China in 2016, our first question for the day is, what has been done to enforce the rights of the Philippines over the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, including Scarborough Shoal and Spratly Islands? Dean Rodell, would you like to update us about this?
Hi, that is a very intriguing question as well. And there are so many developments on the aspect of the conflict in South China Sea, or the West Philippine Sea as we refer to it. But there and recently we have seen that China has announced the two districts that they are establishing in the Paracels and near Spanish, and the sandbars, submerged reefs, and underwater canyons. There are China's new claims in South China Sea. There are 80 submerged sandbars and others that China is claiming. But as regards to the question of how and what are the developments after the West Philippine Sea decision, or the South China Sea dispute resolution by the Permanent Court for Arbitration, on the part of the Philippines, there were diplomatic protests filed before the United Nations because of the aggressions or the actions made by China in the West Philippine Sea. And I think the actions of the Philippines are limited to that, except that we are also exploring on the other aspects of joint collaborations or joint concessions in certain areas where we can probably talk about aspects of cooperation. And you know that in international law there is a problematic area in terms of enforcing decisions, and the decision of the Philippines versus China in this particular context has not been implemented properly, because you know that in international law and based on the treaty, the parties are expected to comply on the basis of pacta sunt servanda, a doctrine which states that parties are in good faith or should be in good faith following the decisions in a particular case, like in this particular matter between the Philippines and China. But so far, it has actually brought certain controversy on in the Philippines and in the international realm, because we have not, as a country, really pushed forward into implementing or enforcing our rights over this particular decision, which in international law, the real politic is that it has a res judicata effect, that that China has to comply and the rest of the world is observing on it.
So it's really the enforcement that's the problem. Attorney Christie, would you like to add to that?
Oh yeah. I think when the decision was rendered, and even before or during the proceedings, China was very consistent that it did not want to comply at all. So I think that's one view that should be looked at by everyone. How could you enforce something if not all the parties comply? So as to the question, what are we doing at present to enforce the decision? Maybe the answer would be, I have to agree with Dean that we are exploring other options, because remember that there had been a lot of criticisms and issues regarding that decision alone. I mean, what would be the compelling factor to compel China to give to our demands, for one, right? So there's no single police in the world that could enforce such, similar to cases in court where you have a sheriff. So I think the Philippines at present, and especially under Duterte's administration, the route that the administration is taking is to negotiate, possibly, so the Philippines could get whatever it was supposed to get via the decision, because basically China doesn't want to comply with the decision. It has been consistent with that point. So I guess that's my take on the matter.
Yes, that's right. So from the beginning, they never recognized the international court, right?
Yes, but still, the fact that they're talking to us, the fact that they're still open with our diplomatic envoys and our diplomatic ties with them are still strong, I think that that's an avenue. At any rate, our point would be just to get whatever was rendered in the decision, whether via the actual tribunal or whether maybe via negotiations, which is probably an example would be the bilateral agreements, probably, that the Philippines and China has.
Yes, which brings me to my follow-up question, Attorney. Do you think that the bilateral agreements that the Philippines and China are getting into, given these bilateral agreements, because I think we've already signed into them, what has that accomplished so far for us, for the Philippines?
My view is that at any rate, international relations is quite tricky. You're talking about countries. Whatever the nitty-gritty details of certain acts are, you can't really expect to follow them to the letter. So I guess the accomplishment would be there are certain progress or developments being welcomed. There are certain aids being given. Maybe it's a give and take situation. That's just my view, because we can't see it from the standpoint of a single act being a compliance with any bilateral agreement. So the fact that they're still communicating with us, the fact that they're still open to communication with us regarding certain developments, I think that's part of an accomplishment. At any rate, they could just close their doors and say, I don't want to talk to you anymore, right? So for me, I think that's a step. That's an accomplishment itself. And given the whole pandemic situation, we've been receiving quite a lot of help and support, not just from China in general, but from the international community, I guess.
Right. What can you say about that, Attorney Dean Rodel?
Yes, as to the economic packages being given to the Philippines, I think that's something that is recognized by the Philippines. The acts of China on this aspect, the economic things that are being given to the country, to the people, especially at this time of the COVID, for instance, and under this current administration, he has been very open to very close relations with China. But on the aspect of the legal stand, legal stance or the legal or rules-based approaches on the conflict in the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea, we have to recognize the fact that it is still an ongoing dispute and that there are gray areas in the execution of a formerly validly granted decision in the particular case. But there can be cooperation agreements. There can be ways in having certain aspects be arranged in such a way that it can promote it can promote cooperation. It can promote bilateral agreements on certain aspects. And China has been from the very beginning of the case has been very open in saying that they just wanted a bilateral arrangement on the conflict, on the settlement of the dispute. But the Philippines said that there is nothing to do in the bilateral agreements because the China has been consistent with its claim on the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea, especially on its historical facts and some some own interpretations on the issue, where the UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, is very clear, and it is the law of the sea, and it has to be complied. So here, it is very clear that despite the offering of the economic side or economic developments between the Philippines and China, it remains that there is a legal or rules-based problem that the parties has to face, and the international community is watching.
That's right. And I believe Indonesia a few days ago used that same ruling to, right, for
Yes.
their to question China's claim in South China Sea.
That is one example that I have noted. So if Indonesia was able to use that openly and vocally in the online world that we have right now, so why can't the Philippines be open and state that we are using the decision that is in our favor for our own benefit and for the country and for the national interests. You know, Florence, that in our political science classes when we were in college, there are some things that we cannot compromise as a country. And even the Constitution has been very clear on that. That would be the national sovereignty and national integrity and all this. We cannot compromise. And it is basic that when we talk about the territory, when we speak about the benefits of the country, considering the um, economic giveaway of the West Philippine Sea, I think national interest should be on top of any decision that the state should have, like the Philippines.
Right. They're saying that President Duterte is pivoting away from the US Philippine relations by cozying up to communist China as a strategy to protect our national interest. Do you agree to that, Attorney Christie? Do you think that's what he's doing now?
I think pivot is a strong word to use. I mean, it's not a complete turnaround from, say, the U.S., because remember, as long as the China has been in relations with the Philippines, the U.S. has always been part of our history as well. So I don't think there could be a complete detachment as to that. But to say what the strategy is, I have to agree with Dean that national interest is paramount. So it's not really pivoting away. Maybe it's the proper weighing of pros and cons. Maybe it's taking something from the relations of the Philippines and the US, and then taking something from the relations of the Philippines and China. But of course, everything, this is quite tricky, as I've mentioned, in international relations or in diplomacy. There are a lot of gray areas. It's not really black and white. You can't just say that you can work with one country and then that would mean that you won't work with another country, because that's not how the world is, especially that we have technology and everything. There's internet. So the standpoint would be national interest is key, or national interest is the first. And then whatever would align with that direction, I think is the road that our country is taking. That's my take on it.
What about you, Dean?
um, the actions of China can be interpreted in so many ways, and we have heard about the isang dagat lately. So it's quite funny that we have this kind of developments, and that there are there are so many tricks as well being made by China on how to deal with the Philippines and the conflict that it is facing with the Philippines as a nation and as a people. So we can see that there are Filipinos here and abroad talking about the possibility of uh, of questioning the acts of China, and and the outrage is very clear that we do not want to be the province of China as it is currently doing, and it appears and China has been appearing to me as an individual Filipino. I must say that I feel that it is doing it's I don't know. It's a political mechanism or a diplomatic approach on their own side, but we can simply interpret that in a way. But again, we have to see a stronger policy on the part of the Philippines in dealing with China, and we have to listen as well to, to the Filipinos. I think that must be done.
Dean, if let's say another president won, let's say the opposition won, for instead of this administration, do you think they will have the same strategy, or probably something harder to enforce the historic decision of the international court?
Maybe yes, maybe no, because we know that there is already a decision, and that is in favor of the Philippines, and it is only up to the current administration or the or talking about the possibility, or I mean it's already moot and academic speaking about that, but right now I think we really have to look into the possibility that how can this current administration maximize the benefits of a favorable decision rendered by an international court? And if the other states or if the other countries, observers outside of the problem of the Philippines and China, would be able to appreciate the decision, so why can't the Philippines as a state recognize this fact that we are victorious in this particular case, and that there is a moral victory to speak of, and it is an actual victory in international law, so it entitles respect by the world community and not only of China. So I think the the, the ultimate word there is respect, and it is not being respected by China.
Yes, but as Attorney Christie was saying earlier, from the very beginning, China never recognized the international court. So now that we are good friends, they're saying we're now BFFs with China, best friends with China. How do we enforce that? I mean, that is a diplomatic nightmare, isn't it? What do you think, Attorney Christie?
Enforcement is a legal term. I think that's what everyone has to understand. You can't enforce an award cannot be enforced by one party over the other. It has to be a third party. Like in courts, there are sheriffs that would enforce the award. That is the main problem here and the main criticism regarding that decision. I think what Dean was saying basically is that the decision is leverage. Whether under this administration or whether in the future administration, we can use that as leverage because an international tribunal actually recognized our territory. But the thing is, enforcement, as legal as it is, cannot be effected if no one will follow it. So, as earlier held by China, while they are not recognizing the jurisdiction of the tribunal, which rendered the decision in 2016, it is really open to all other arrangements or agreements, which in fact is now being entered into by both countries. So for in that aspect, I think it's a win still for us, but we have yet to receive the full benefits of that decision. That's the problem. So the administration, whether now or maybe enforcement per se, would reach up to the next administration, has to be a step-by-step process. Because as mentioned earlier by Dean, it's basically China claiming that it has sovereignty over our own territories. So if we are very adamant in giving up our own, that's probably the same position of China. So there has to be compromise somewhere. And I think negotiation would be the best key. And bilateral agreements which were entered into, I think, are the good steps in order to get what we want, or in order to get what we deserve.
I
Okay.
just wanted to react on the bilateral aspects, because we have to remember that in the South China Sea conflict, it is not only that China as a state, which is our opponent or claiming state or claimant state in the area. The conflict is not as simple as we could imagine this is. So we have Indonesia, we have Vietnam, we have
Malaysia.
Malaysia, and this is a multi-party conflict that in international law and in the aspect of alternative dispute resolution, there may be different approaches, or sometimes we would reach an impasse on the aspects of settlement, and that there have been actions like on certain declarations made between the ASEAN and China, but it was left unfollowed. And UNCLOS for one is a is a is a convention or a treaty that was agreed to upon by many states, including China and the rest of the claimants in the South China Sea. But again, there can be mechanisms like Attorney Chrissy Jane mentioned about the bilateral agreements. Bilateral agreements could be good, and in certain aspects, and maybe we have to shift on on certain mechanisms as to the settlement of this dispute. Because when you speak about territory, when you speak about sovereignty or national interests, we cannot really meet somewhere, because all our national interests would be contrary to each other. So maybe a shift now would be to go into collaborative diplomatic cooperations. It may be bilateral, it may be multilateral, or it can be focusing on non-political issues like promoting dialogue and cooperation, or enhance mutual trust and confidence, and in matters of common interests, for instance, like marine environmental protection, coordination between coast guards, protection of fishermen,
Yeah.
like the protection of fishermen, for instance, like Filipinos for the past years or for the past generations have been engaged in traditional fishing, and these areas like Scarborough Shoals, Spratlys are the fishing grounds for traditional fishers, like fishermen, like Filipino fishermen, or even Vietnamese or Indonesian. And I think there can be possibility of cooperation in this particular area, and the possibility, for instance, of joint exploration on certain aspects like this, for as long as it complies with requirements, for instance, of the Constitution. I mean, there
Mhm.
are mechanisms, but the thing there is that which one is being chosen by the current administration, or has there been a choice made, or has there been an action done on this particular conflict? So the
Dean,
Filipinos are waiting, and
Mhm.
we have to act on that.
Speaking about that, Dean, there's a 60-40 China oil deal that's being talked about now. Do you think that could be an example of what you were just saying?
So you're asking me. Um, it can be a collaborative mechanisms or cooperation arrangement that may be allowed under our system. But you have to remember that there are limitations as to that. And
Mm-hmm.
number one, we have the constitutional limitations like Section 2 of Article 12 of the 1987 Constitution, or the economic provisions of the Constitution. The case, for instance, of Labugal Bilaan Tribal Association, a 2004 case, which speaks about the limitations under the Constitution. And joint explorations can be as tricky as any bilateral agreements, because here there are mechanisms that the participation of a foreign-owned corporation in the exploration, development, and utilization of natural resources may have or may pose certain constitutional questions or impose certain limitations on the agreement. So there can be compliance with that for as long as it complies with the limitation as provided for by the Constitution and the rules set forth. Then it can be allowed. And you know that the that we have to admit that the capacity of certain Filipino corporations may be limited as well. So we need to move forward and maximize on on the resources. And
Mhm.
if cooperation would be good for the Philippine economy, then I think we should recommend that. But we cannot sacrifice again. We cannot sacrifice the putting aside of the Philippine Constitution as the law of the land. And I think that's basic.
Thank you, Dean. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I would like to hear from Attorney Christie. Maybe you can wrap it up, Attorney, and give your final message about this specific issue.
Oh yeah, just to add something to whatever Dean said. I think the president cannot totally ignore whatever economic benefit is provided, for example, by China, even proposed by China. You can never really ignore the decision because number one, we were the one who filed that. Okay. We went through all the lengths just to get a decision, and number two, that's about our territory, that's about our sovereignty. So whatever is the economic benefit being provided or proposed by China can never outweigh that. But I think strategically speaking, as I've mentioned, since there are many ways around this, not just the decision, I think this is one way or one of the ways that the current administration is looking at in order to get some sort of a deal for the Philippines. As has been consistently held, we cannot enforce something that the other party doesn't want to follow. Unless there's like a super police in the world or a super police in the universe that could say enforce the decision for us maybe. But at the end of the day, if we're getting something which is on its face economic, but really maybe it's the step towards getting the or enforcing the decision at our own terms. That's my final word on the matter.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Attorney Christie and Dean Rodell, for all your insights. I believe our audience learned a lot this afternoon about this issue. So I'm now going to pass you on to Ms. Roma for the second question.
Okay, so let's have now the second question. Now let's move on and talk about another controversial topic, which is the POGOs, or Philippine Offshore Gaming Operators. PAGCOR started the processing of license applications for POGOs in 2016 after it decided not to renew the license of local online gambling firm Philwell in an effort to boost its revenue. There are three license categories. Category 1 involves services that have live streaming with women online gambling dealers, and category 2 and 3 are subsectors of business process outsourcing, or BPO, which provide back office support. However, the IT and Business Process Association of the Philippines, an umbrella industry group of BPOs, do not consider POGOs in general as BPOs. IBPAP's members are registered with either the Philippine Economic Zone Authority or the Board of Investments, while POGOs get their license to operate from PAGCOR. In fact, the group argues differentiate POGOs and BPOs. There are 56 PAGCOR licensed POGOs as of June 9, 2019. It is estimated that at least 30 firms or more operating in the Philippines illegally. Only 17% of those employed in POGOs are Filipino nationals. So POGOs are essentially online casinos operating outside of the Philippines, and to highlight, Filipinos make up a slim percentage in their workforce. So let us discuss and answer the question. POGOs are said to contribute billions to the Philippine economy, but problems such as human trafficking, labor exploitation, money laundering, and prostitution have also been closely linked to their operations. So the question here is that, will the economic benefits of POGOs outweigh the increase of criminal activities in the Philippines? That aside from not paying taxes, they are also involved in corrupt practices, money laundering, sex, and human trafficking. What are your views about this one, Attorney Christy Jane Balino?
Okay. Probably, I think what we need to understand first is the nature of a POGO. Since it's an online gaming, no Filipinos basically could participate in it. So it's a gaming activity here which caters to foreigners. So if you're asking about criminal activities, I think it's too broad a question. Because if you take out the question would mean if you take out the pogos, then there would be no criminal activities at all. But if you are to zone in, say, on human trafficking, labor exploitation, pogo operations are just one aspect of it. Essentially, for the Philippines, we rely mainly for our economy on international revenue or remittances. So, economically speaking, the POGOs have benefited. I think in 2019, there was around 14 or 10 plus billion that was generated by the POGO. And there was a statement issued by PAGCOR that, or not a statement, a primer that was issued by PAGCOR, basically saying that the POGO was created because there were a lot of illegal gambling activities that were discovered. So in order to regulate all that and make money out of it, essentially, then they were able to regulate POGO. So for me, and I think this will receive a lot of flack, I think the economic benefits would outweigh the criminal activity simply because it is not just the POGO that is the source of criminal activities. I mean, you have to address that first. There's law enforcement, there's law and order issue. There are a lot of other things which could be addressed, not just the POGO. So just to take out or just to blame it on the POGO itself would be, for me, not categorically correct. Okay, so as far as the POGO is concerned, the economic activities or economic benefits outweigh the risk of criminal activity simply because it is not the sole reason that there exist such criminal activities.
Okay, thank you so much, Attorney. How about Attorney Rodel? What's your take about this one?
Yeah, thank you very much. The statement of Attorney Chrissy Jane is very intriguing as well. I know that there are opinions, so many opinions on the aspect, but I think for me the economic benefits of Pogo here in the Philippines has not been maximized as it was expected, and if we are not able to maximize on this, and there are problems that it bring in the Philippines, like gambling, also like terrorism or a tool for money laundering and other criminal activities like women are being trafficked and violation of labor aspects where Chinese people are being prioritized than Filipinos. And there are so many things that if it is not allowed in China, it corrupts the moral fiber of their country. So why are we allowing it in the Philippines in the first place, where it also caters to the people if they cannot do it directly in their state? So why do we allow them to do it indirectly in the Philippines, where in fact we have our own moral fiber of a people that is being protected as well? So if we look into the the moral impact, the other impacts to the society in the Philippines, taking aside corruption, taking aside the aspects of money laundering, or taking aside the terrorism aspects or abuse of women or even men here, and the criminals that are who are coming in the Philippines, then maybe there are questions as to whether the economic benefits would really be good to the country when it caters to criminal activities. But again, it may be a matter of enforcement, or it may be a matter of enforcing the laws, for instance, like taxation,
Mhm.
like criminal law, like policing and others, so that we can maximize also the benefits that this Pogo business has been bringing to the Philippines. So if we are clamoring that it has it has billions of pesos to be contributed to the Philippines, but the BIR only collected how much? So I think here law enforcement, um, strengthening of policies like anti-corruption policies, like we heard about the Pastilla scam and the Bureau of
Mhm.
Immigration and then others. So I mean, it's a system, it's a system-based problem that we have to contend. And the presence of Pogo itself may not be a problem, but that systems that are loose may subside or may be lost somewhere because of corruption and other activities. So I think it is a call for us to strengthen the systems.
I understand. Thank you so much, attorney. So it means, like, of course, Pogo is not solely the main sources of criminal activities in the Philippines, but it's also about strengthening the law enforcement. Well, leading to this one, so I just want to know too. So because Senator Alan Peter Cayetano wants to ensure that Pogos will comply with social distancing rules as they restart the operations. Would you think Pogo would comply with these new normal rules, knowing that 31,600 Filipinos employed in this company? Um,
Am I gonna answer?
Answering that?
yes, yes, Attorney Christie.
Okay. They have to comply. They're not exempted from compliance. I mean, the fact that they were created mainly to cater to foreigners doesn't mean that they are exempted from compliance with the law. Remember, if Filipinos could be charged for not following the protocols or the security and safety protocols which are enforced, then why should POGOs be any different? But as to the enforcement, I think there had been a lot of issues, especially with this pandemic, that there had been a lot of secret operations in POGOs. They have their own secret hospitals. But this is a matter actually of enforcement. Remember that POGOs are registered under PAGCOR. So they have all the list of at least all the legal POGOs. But we have to consider there are a lot of illegal POGOs as well, which is, I think, one of the problems in the Philippines, that not just POGOs, but there are a lot of illegal activities that are not being monitored, or if monitored, the enforcement is not that great. So as to that, they have to comply, but it would be up to the Philippines to see to it that we go to their establishments, we check out, and we check out what our Filipino citizens as their workers are doing, because that's part of our what do you call this, social welfare responsibilities, or welfare of the citizens responsibilities. Just because and it doesn't have to be differentiated as to Filipino workers and Chinese. The fact that they are here, they are susceptible to infection, they are susceptible to COVID, so everyone must comply, whether Filipino or whether the Pogos.
Exactly. How about Attorney Rodel?
Yes, I agree with attorney Christy Jane here. And the reason why there always a question on the Chinese over Pogo because of their their capacity not to comply with the laws. And I think that is something that that as well. So talking about law enforcement, Chinese and the Pogos are not excused for non-compliance of the laws in the Philippines. And we have to be reminded of that always. Because if if they cannot comply with certain regulations, even by the smoking regulations or whatever, I think they have no reason to stay in the Philippines. And speaking about law enforcement, especially on the matters of health, in the matters of uh, of environmental protection, for instance, I think they are and should be uh, following the rules in the Philippines. And we have to remember that in the POGO setup, there are laws that are enforced, not only the emergency or health issues, but labor, immigration, taxation, even the money laundering, even the controversial terrorism law or the support for terrorism activities and gambling. And all these should be strong in its implementation. I think that will not be a problem. But the problem there is that some of the Pogo operators, the legal and the illegal ones, wanted to just get the economic benefits by bringing here illegal workers or illegal establishments. So if they can't comply with the simple rules, they should be out of this country.
Okay, absolutely, attorney. Well, there are a lot of issues and controversies regarding POGOs, and one of the controversies right now is about the real estate. So there's a question here: Are POGOs the reason? POGOs the reason why real estate prices have gone up? If the call to ban the POGOs happens, how will this impact this sector? Dean, attorney.
Okay, I think that's a recognized implication lately of Pogo. It has an impact. It has a great impact on real estate, like renting or for the business or residential. I have been working with Baclaran for the past years, and I have observed the sudden change in the area, and even simple boarding houses or apartments before from how much has skyrocketed to thousands and thousands of pesos that ordinary Filipino cannot anymore rent or get a decent rent for a condominium because these Chinese people are already are renting at a higher price, and it has a great impact on the prices of real estate. And for one, um, it helped the economic aspect of this particular business, but in some other ways it also has catered to certain illegal activities because some condominium units are being used by for a one condominium unit there are like 20 persons inside, or we have also witnessed that some units are even being used as illegal hospitals or clinics and others. So talking about impact, I think that cannot be denied.
Okay, understood. So is it also possible or true in a sense that Google overtakes IT BPM as a major real estate driver in 2020? Attorney Christie?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Sorry, my connection is quite.
Is it also possible or true in a sense then that Pogo overtakes IT BPM as a major real estate driver in 2020?
I think that has to be tempered with what the pandemic that's going on. Because remember, these are foreigners, basically, and these are offshore gaming activities that are what do you call this? Are paid for by foreigners. So I don't think that the Philippines is the only one affected by the pandemic. If you're looking at 2020 or even the years to come, I think the whole world has to recover first with the pandemic. So it's quite premature to say that POGOs will be the driving force in the near future because basically everyone is affected. We don't even know how to get over the current pandemic because we still are in it. So I think that's a lot of thing to that's I think something to consider because in 2021 maybe in 2022 who knows, we don't even have a clear cut view yet of what's going to happen in the next months, especially with the COVID. So I don't think it's going to be a main or going to take over the BPO or the IT business per se in terms of real estate. It has to be tempered in light of the pandemic issue.
Okay. So there's a heavy demand. I mean, there's a heavy demand for condominiums by the migrant workers from China and cause undue inflation of property prices. In many instances, condo units have become inaccessible to local buyers because Chinese have jacked up the prevailing price. So Senator Villanueva said that they're not just robbing Filipino jobs, but they're also taking away our homes. What can you say about this one? Attorney Christie?
I have to agree with that. I mean, I come from personal experience because I'm also living in a condominium unit that has several floors rented out by Chinese groups, not just people, Chinese groups that are being fetched every day. I mean, I don't know their inner workings. I don't know the current work setup, but I have to agree. They've driven out some local Filipinos, not just for the prices, but basically for lack discipline in following condominium rules and regulations. So it's not just the prices that drives the Filipinos away from the condominium units, but largely maybe the lack of discipline in following certain rules because of the presence of foreigners. I mean, I can't blame them. Basically, not all Filipinos are law-abiding citizens. Not all Filipinos are obedient. But I think it has been a major factor, especially under our law that foreigners cannot own land in the Philippines, but condominiums may be leased out to them and they could stay here in condominium units. I think the foreigners, or the not just the Chinese, the foreigners in general, are using this to their full advantage.
Okay. How about Attorney Ro? What's your opinion about this?
Yes, I agree with Attorney Chrissy Jane on this aspect of the use of condominiums. But I think it does not totally deprive of Filipinos on this, as this could be an equal opportunity also, and that is being provided for even for foreigners. And we need to improve on our economic sector. So we have been very open also to foreigners in general, not only on Chinese people. So uh, I think there is a great impact on the use of condominiums or buildings by Filipinos for it to be being open to foreigners like Chinese. But again, there should be a a mechanism on 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 certain condominium for percentage or something that may be established if we really want to provide for Filipinos. Because remember that condominium units can be owned by foreigners. So if there is a a a current rule on that and a stronger rule or policy on that, then maybe we can protect the Filipinos.
I see, I understand. So there should be like a stronger rule about owning properties or real estate in the Philippines regarding this matter. Understood. So let's go to our next question. Gambling in China is illegal, and the PRC is cracking down on these online gambling companies. But why are they legally allowed to operate in the Philippines? In Rodel? Yes, attorney.
So it's me. All right. So that's also a question. So if it is illegal in China, so why are we allowing it here in the Philippines when we know that there are so many effects of this particular gambling activity in our society as a whole? And we do not only speak about the economic, political, or other aspects of this particular industry, and that for many years that only in the Philippines gambling as an activity has shown to be a cause of other problems in a society. And while it is not allowed for Filipinos to participate in the pogo operated by Chinese, maybe because of language barrier or something, the fact is they are doing what they are doing here in the Philippines, what they cannot do directly in China. So why do we cater this particular activity for them? Well, it might be good for the Philippines, but again, its impact to the Filipino society as a whole, or the public at large, cannot be measured in the simple economic benefits that we get from this particular activity. And we have to remember also that Pogo has been a tool also for money laundering, especially Chinese people doing money laundering here in the Philippines, and also even support of terroristic activities. And that is why in the Pogo rules by the PAGCOR, there are compliance mechanisms on anti-terrorist financing or anti money laundering compliance matters that has to be submitted to Pogo for uh, for this matter. So again, it's always a balancing and checking on the aspects of business, like in ordinary businesses in the Philippines. I think strengthening of the rules, the laws and the compliance mechanisms and enforcement mechanisms, then maybe we can deter the problematic effects of this pogo. But for me, honestly, I am not in favor of pogo in the Philippines.
Okay, understood. How about Attorney Christie? Or what's your side about this one?
I'm quite objective about this. I'm not again. I'm very pro Filipino, but to be objective about it, the Philippines doesn't care about the laws of China. I mean, whatever is illegal in another country, no foreign law is recognized here. I think that's one. From a legal standpoint, whatever is illegal in other countries should is not law here, unless say you're talking about extradition, you're talking about terrorism, and all other what do you call this, crimes that may be committed transnationally. But why the Philippines would allow the POGOs to operate? Because we have PAGCOR and the laws that cater to it. Gambling is allowed in the Philippines under regulation. It's not strictly prohibited, unlike in other countries. So we're not really allowing the Chinese to gamble. We're allowing gambling industry here. In a statement by PAGCOR, they were saying essentially, since Filipinos aren't allowed to play in POGOs, which are essentially online casinos, right? What PAGCOR was saying is that at least we are not allowing Filipinos or our own citizens to play in our soil. It's the foreigners that give out their monies online. There are no cash transactions in POGO operations. So I think that's one point that has to be. I'm very objective. I'm pro-Filipino, just a disclaimer for everybody. I'm pro-Filipino, but legally, I'm talking about everything legally. We are allowing the online activity, but we are not condoning or we are not circumventing any Chinese laws, because the Chinese laws do not simply apply to us. That's my point.
I want to make a comment on that.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes,
Regarding the
Dean.
use of, yes, on the use of Filipinos, like Filipinos not being allowed to participate in Pogo, even if the Filipinos are abroad, they cannot use of they cannot participate in the Pogo operations either as a client or customer or even a participant here. But then again, there are mechanisms, illegal mechanisms in the Pogo industry as well, that that it is under the laws. They may be allowed or they may not be allowed to participate, but there are mechanisms like mirroring or whatever schemes that Filipinos still can participate even in WeChat or even in Facebook. The on the gambling by rated by Pogo, like I have watched a hearing in court on the illegal activities of certain Chinese, and that WeChat uh, and other mechanisms are being utilized for illegal use of Pogo operations or illegal activities or uh, or illegal actions on this particular Pogo. But again, we have to remember that tong-its, for instance, for Filipinos, they can be an ordinary Filipino can be imprisoned for, and see, we have seen also people who have stayed in the police stations because they played they played tong-its in their houses. So, and these Chinese people are left free.
Mhm.
And I mean here, so I think it's better not to allow them here.
Okay, it's interesting because you were telling a while ago that Filipinos don't participate in this kind of activity. But I have just one main concern here. There are pogo girls, mostly are Filipino-looking dealers who do not speak but smiles with their eyes, and they have this Mandarin that speaks for them, who speaks for them. The girl dealers are required to wear skimpy clothes or revealing clothes, and there are even like bunny ears to complete the whole package, playboy look. Players watch them on the laptop from the laptop, and it is some sort of online prostitution. What are the legal actions our country is doing this in this kind of matter?
I think I think we have certain laws on this being enforced, particularly on human trafficking and other applicable laws in the Philippines. You know that our revised penal code and our special laws as to protect this women or men regardless of nationality in the Philippines. I think they are currently being enforced in the Philippines, but as raised by certain senators like Senator Ontiveros, there may be activities beyond the eyes of the enforcers. And again, I for me would like to ask for consistency in our gambling laws. Like playing cards are prohibited, but we are allowing this. And in fact, if we look into the other playing cards, for instance, this can help the memory of our senior citizens active, but they are not allowed. I mean, there are consistencies or inconsistencies in the law, to be specific, and the criminal activities that would be coming from the pogo or illegal use of pogo business in the Philippines may be, and I think really
Mhm.
should be stopped by law enforcement.
Mhm. Okay. Now, may we have also Attorney Christy for her opinion about this one?
As to, I think there are several news that came out regarding prostitution in Pogos. Um, for one, it all boils down to regulation. Remember, we are talking about women, not just Chinese, but Filipino women. So, if you look at regulation, there are labor laws, for example, that protect women, and these are enforced even in the Pogos. Number two, as Dean mentioned, there are criminal laws against human trafficking or prostitution per se that are being enforced. But the problem here is that if you do not see everything that is happening, how can you protect it? That's precisely, I think, the point of Dean. While we have all these laws that protect, and for example, the Pogo industry itself is highly regulated. It has to register with the AMLA, it has to register with PAGCOR, it has to comply with certain requirements. At the end of the day, if no one will visit, for example, to see if the laws are being enforced or the laws are being complied with, then how could there be proper enforcement or proper protection of our citizens? As we mentioned earlier, these aren't only Chinese nationals that are working in the Pogos, there are Filipinos. So, what does that mean? Our law enforcers or our agencies that are concerned with whether immigration, whether labor, whether BIR, should be on their toes with respect to, say, visiting these establishments and looking at the compliance with certain laws.
Well, thank you so much, Attorney. Well, from our discussion, Philippine online gambling operations are creating a ripple of economic development, particularly in the property and food sectors. Locals are complaining about the high rental rates and rowdiness of some Chinese workers. And Pogo girls are required to wear skimpy clothes, and the possibility of money laundering worries some industry insiders. So these are the takeaways from our discussion. Thank you so much, Attorney Balino and Dean Patton, for such a well-packed discussion. And back to you, Ms. Florence, for the third question.
What a heated discussion, Ms. Roma. I wanted to join. Okay, so let's move on. In October last year, Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez III and China's Vice Premier Hu Chunhua signed several agreements during a meeting held at the Bureau of Treasury in Manila. Two of the agreements are part of President Duterte's flagship infrastructure program called Build, while the other four cover trade, customs, and communications. They also discussed the best ways to integrate the Build program with China's Belt and Road Initiative, as well as the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. The Philippines and China have signed 6 bilateral agreements, further cementing the Philippine-China relationship. China is fast becoming one of the Philippines' largest trading partners. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the hatred against the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China seems to be growing every day. When the Embassy of China released the Iisang Dagat propaganda song, an overwhelming number of Filipinos took social media by storm to rebuke it. The aggressive moves in the South China Sea during the pandemic did not sit well with a lot of Filipinos. This on top of all the COVID-19 controversies blaming China for the spread of the virus. So our third question is, what will happen to the Philippine-China relations after the pandemic? What do you think, Dean Rodell?
Well, the Philippines and China relations under this current administration is strong, and I don't think that it will go down in the next few years or before the end of the term. The the attitude of President Duterte, for instance, together with the leadership of China, has been noted for a stronger alliance and and the possibility of moving forward together. And hearing the Iisang Dagat, I as a Filipino, I'm not happy about that. But if we look at it objectively as it is unfolding before our very eyes, you can say that the relationship is strong and it will become stronger for the next few months before the end of the term. But again, it's always a wake-up call also for the Filipinos, especially that when you mentioned earlier about the build and the Belt and Road policy of China and other jurisdictions, not only in the Philippines, it has proven to be ineffective and full of corruption and not a good example, like the loan agreements entered into by other states with China and the infrastructure offerings by China that has proven to be a source of corruption and that has not been very effective. But the loans have skyrocketed, and in fact, we have to recognize that in the current administration, the loan of the Philippines has gone up so high in trillions in just a few months. So I think there must be something to be wary about on the stronger relationship between the Philippines and China. And the legislature, which is controlled by the current administration, and the other implementers, I think we should always go back to that basic goal of us in the government, that is to look after for the Filipino interests.
Mhm. What about you, Attorney Christie?
I think, for one, China and Philippines relations have been pre-existing. I think that's one thing to consider. Prior to this pandemic, we have been indebted to China in terms of money. China has been involved in, as you've said, in our infrastructure and in our gaming industry, for example. There are a lot of things that could not be easily, what do you call it, dissolved by a certain interim event. More importantly, there has never been a statement, I believe, issued by the Philippine government to blame China for the pandemic. There has never been a statement regarding COVID and China. So I don't think it has any effect at all at the current Philippine-China relations. The pandemic itself is considered since it's a pandemic, it's an international event. Whether it came from China or elsewhere, I don't think it will impact greatly the Philippines and China's relations negatively. But if any, it could be used probably in the field of technology or medical field, probably to move forward, because I think there are a lot of offers from China to offer help or aid, not just monetary, but in terms of medicines and other technologies that could be used in this current pandemic. So I don't think it's gonna affect it negatively, at least, because it has no relations with whatever is existing. At any rate, we've had a discussion regarding the West Philippine Sea, which is a bigger matter, which has not affected the relationship of China and the Philippines. So I think that's one thing to consider.
Yes, you're right, because it's a government to government. I think nothing will really change that. But in terms of
I
public
think,
opinion,
in terms of public opinion, that's what I wanted to say.
hmm,
While the government or both governments, when you say government, technically it's a pol sci term, it's the people. But when you say the administration, the current administration,
administration.
yeah, and the current Chinese administration are in good relations, that doesn't reflect the people's views. I think that's one thing. Because people who have been skeptical of China will always be skeptical of China. And because of this pandemic, which was presumably created in Wuhan, China, the people who were skeptical will become more skeptical after this. And
Mhm.
that will probably, I don't know, it will translate into more opposition with the actions of the current administration in terms of its relations with China.
So you don't think anything will change?
Yeah,
Well, pretty
basically.
much.
But it's a politics is tricky, and it's a gray area thing. It may be swayed by public opinion, it may be swayed by foreign policy or whatsoever. But as we've all seen, we are always in surprise of whatever the actions of the current administration. One thing it's this, the next thing it's another. So we
That's
can't
true.
really predict it. Even if we have a straight line to say, hey, this pandemic apparently is from China, so what? If nobody thinks it is, then there's nothing really. There's no much different in terms of the future. What's going to happen in the future?
Right. What about the relationship of the Philippines to other countries? For example, Philippines to the US and Philippines to Japan. Will this be affected because of the stronger relationship of China and the Philippines? Will there be any sort of impact to this? Attorney Rodel? Dean?
Yeah, I think um, I think the as to the way the Philippines relate to, for instance, with the U.S. or with Japan, does not necessarily change because of how Philippines is dealing with China. So remember that again in the arena of international relations, we can always see the the factors behind the relationship of each one. So recently we heard about the withdrawal on the part of the Philippines as to the termination of the VFA or the agreement with the visiting forces agreement with the United States of America, and I think that that is a a very welcome development for the Philippines and U.S. relations, and it has also always been an ally in or against other states. And as to Japan, for instance, we have a very strong relationship historically with the Philippines, despite the many odds that happened in the World War II era. I don't think that the relationship of the Philippines should change with other states, especially now that we have a stronger relationship with China. But again, in many other respects, we can see some slight changes. The manner of the attitude of the Philippine leadership as regards the U.S. So we heard about the the sudden actions to terminate, and then the sudden decision to not terminate. And I think these are some policy issues and decisions by the current administration, and the stronger relationship that we have built for the past years with other states should remain.
Mhm, mhm. What about you, Attorney Christie?
I think it's giving other countries like a second thought regarding their current relations with the Philippines. As mentioned by Dean, when we withdrew from the VFA, which basically didn't, according to critics, it didn't do us any good. Okay, it made the U.S. second guess, or maybe it gave it a second thought. Hey, we might want to up our relations with the Philippines, because at any rate, whoever we side, we are a strategic territory to begin with in terms of our position in Asia, and I think it's gonna give other countries a second thought regarding if we have existing relations, for say in Japan, say in the US. That's, I think, the strategy of our current administration. It's about weighing pros and cons. So since we are getting, well, according to the administration, a lot of pros from China at present,
Mhm.
then we should shy away from others, perhaps that would make them give us a better offer. I forgot the term. There's a political term for it in terms of being basically two-faced. You gotta be two-faced in the sense that whatever works should be the current route, because at any rate, as I've mentioned, it's the national interest that is the paramount consideration. So if we are in relations with other countries, and they are, say, in antagonistic position with China regarding something else, maybe that would give them a second look, not for the best as always, but maybe it would give them something to think about in order to give us something better too.
Mhm.
That is, I think, something only about the economic side of the relationship. But when we speak about the political or legal aspects, especially when we go back to our first issue earlier today regarding West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea, and I think that should have an effect on the relations with uh, with other states, the other states in relation to China, because as said, we wanted a companion in this struggle of uh, of of winning against China in terms of the legal aspects of the South China Sea decision, and we wanted the world to know that China has not been following the effects of the convention or the treaty and the decision rendered by a permanent court of arbitration.
Yes. In fact, the coronavirus pandemic does not appear to have hampered or boosted the Beijing's policy on the South China Sea. So
Exactly, because like we heard about the the development in the South China Sea, and in fact, they have been developing the two district under the Nansha. Uh, was it Nansha? I forgot the name, but
island,
two,
yeah.
two districts in the South China Sea, and I think it did not COVID did not stop them from from pursuing their illegal acts when we look into international law.
Right. So what do you think will be the effect of that to the administration's relationship with the Chinese administration after the pandemic? But then you've already answered that by saying there'll probably be no change
Yeah.
Because
despite that.
like economic, because we have to distinguish
Distinguish,
economic, political from legal relationships
Mm.
here. As to the economic aspect, even the Binondo is a proof that we have a very strong Chinese community in the Philippines, and our forefathers have been traders, and we have been eating hopia, etc. And 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 again, there are other dimensions that we sometimes we can agree not to disagree, or we can disagree not to agree on aspects, but on the legal side, when we look into certain rules and international law, speaking about law, then there must be your rules, policies, and laws that should be complied with, be it bilaterally or multilaterally. And if one state does not comply with any with any agreement that it has entered into, I think that should taint a or that should paint a compliance a non-compliance or comply with pacta sunt servanda principle, and that's something bad in international relations.
Mhm. Okay. China's creeping influence in Philippine telco, electricity, water. What is this about? Is the Duterte administration selling the country's vital infrastructure to China? What is your stand regarding this issue? Attorney Christie?
Okay, number one, these are, as you mentioned, vital infrastructures. We have laws in place that these cannot be owned by foreigners, for one. Okay, so as to the influence, there had been a lot of again issues regarding this because China is everywhere. There was even a show or a documentary made, "What would the world be without China?" Because everything comes from China at present. So all raw materials come from China, so on and so forth. So whether there's a creeping influence, I think it would still be subject to regulation because there could never be an upfront Chinese, what do you call this, corporation or Chinese individual that would say that I own a telco, I own a Meralco like corporation or
Mm.
Maynilad, because these are infrastructures reserved for Filipinos alone. But I have to recognize, or we also have to recognize that there are a lot of Chinese businessmen here that have become power players in the industry. When I say power players, they influence the decision. It's not really the current administration selling our infrastructures, but this has been ongoing, not just to the Chinese, but the foreign influence on our vital infrastructures, not mainly in the actual owning of it, but maybe in the decisions that came up to that led to choosing a certain corporation. Maybe that's something to think about. It's not about selling because you can't do that legally, but it's about being influenced to choose a particular entity or choose a particular supplier for that matter that may be foreign, whether it's Chinese or another foreigner. So there.
There was a recent bill passed in Congress about ownership, right? So I believe the telco and power can now be fully owned
That is
by
a
foreigners. Yeah.
Proposal, yeah.
that is a proposal in in Congress
Yeah.
about the ownership of foreigners of certain industries. And again, I have to go back to the statement earlier of Attorney Christy Jane about this industries or utilities that you have mentioned, vital industries or vital public utilities in the Philippines, which are considered to be nationalized industries reserved for the Filipinos. And with the current setup that we have to contend with the constitutional limitations
Mm.
that foreigners cannot simply own a particular industry because of these limitations. And until such time that there is a change in the Philippine Constitution and the laws that involve involve these vital industries, then we cannot we cannot see in the next months the taking over of China on certain utilities. But again, you have to remember also that there are Filipinos who have established their businesses in the Philippines, although they are Chinese sounding Filipinos because of their and if we have to look into the richest Filipinos, we have Chinese Filipinos who have established their names in the field of business in the Philippines, and that corporations here may be utilized by this particular Chinese businessman. And I don't think that, and there should never be a, an ownership that would go outside of the constitutional limitations.
Mhm, mhm.
Just to comment on it, on that bill, because raised a lot of eyebrows basically. I think I have to relate this because I teach labor law, and in labor law there's a concept of an alien employment, wherein before you allow an alien to work here, there must be a need for it, which should be established, and number two, that there is no other Filipino qualified for it.
That's right.
So I just hope that our legislature gets reminded of that fact. If we
Mhm.
have such strict laws regarding labor, and we love Filipinos and we want to give them jobs, and we have such strict regulations regarding the work of foreigners, why shouldn't it be not applied to our telcos, which are essentially vital industries? Just one major breakdown would cost the whole Philippines everything. Just I mean, we're not saying that they won't do any good. What we're saying is loyalty is number one. I mean,
Mhm.
Filipino first. right? You should expect loyalty and you should expect compassion from your own citizens. So I think maybe our legislature needs to be reminded of certain things that they actually enacted, especially like the alien employment. If they have such strict requirements for that, why don't they just follow it, or why don't they just remember the intent of the law?
They are they are preoccupied by so many things, and they forgot the basics, like in the
Mhm.
Constitution, or
Yeah.
the basics. These are the basic things in under the Constitution in these vital industries. While we wanted that there is competition on the aspects, for instance, of telecom, and
Mhm.
opening up of telecom to other players in this particular aspect would
Mhm.
give a better connectivity, for instance, for Filipinos, rather than being limited to two or three telcos in the Philippines. And it might be opening for other possibilities that may be good for the Philippines. But I agree with you, and it should always be a reminder for the policymakers that Filipinos should be on top of everything as a consideration.
Hmm. And just to comment on what Attorney Christie said, I've been an HR for so long in multinational companies.
Mhm.
And actually, it's very easy to circumvent those.
Yeah.
You just send a letter to Dole and say that you can even have a template and say
Mhm.
that, this specific position is something that
Required,
a
yeah.
non-Filipino can do, and a
Mhm.
Filipino is not qualified to do it, and that's it.
Mhm.
So it's actually, practically, it's actually very easy to
Mhm.
circumvent.
Yeah.
So, but I agree with both of you that we should think about Filipinos first. And there's a reason why vital um, fields should be
Industries.
protected in our society, in our law, by our own
Citizens.
legislature.
Mhm.
So we are now moving on to the next part of our program. Thank you very much, Attorney Rodel and Attorney Christie. I think we are having a very good discussion and a very balanced discussion, I would say, of Philippine-China relations. So let us now move on to the question and answer from the audience. So we have Mr. Koji Takabuchi,
Yes.
Brandline student. Good
Uh,
afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I believe you have a question for Attorney Rodel and Attorney Christie. Go ahead.
A question. Uh, this pandemic, many companies already get economic damage. I afraid, for example, China has many monies. China February invest in Philippine companies, and important company in Philippines are under, I afraid, important company in Philippines are under Chinese control because they have a lot of money, and Philippine companies already damaged. They can invest in Philippine companies. How do you think about that situation?
Are you asking the question to both of them?
Yes.
Okay. So, Dean, would you like to answer the question?
Sorry, I wasn't able to get entirely the question, but can I can
Did he say? Did he say? I think he was saying that since it's the pandemic and China has a lot of money, is that it? What
Yes.
if China pulls out? What do you what?
Yes. China will
Pull out.
China. China. So now intend to
Invest.
control. Yes.
control?
Control through investment.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think with the current setup in the Philippines, and as we have mentioned about the economic relationship between the Philippines and China, it appears that the Chinese businessman, for instance, have a very strong hold in the businesses, a very strong
Mm.
connection. But even the presence of POGOs, we have the presence of the the companies here in the Philippines that are even attempting to get over the nationalized industries. So I think the the actions of Chinese businessmen has been very strong lately, but it doesn't mean that the Japanese people or the Americans or other nationalities should be left behind. I think the administration should create a balance with investments, particularly, and considering that we are marketing the Philippines as an economic hub. So we invite not only the Chinese but other nationalities. In that way, we can create competition, and in that way, the Filipinos would benefit as a whole.
Mm. Uh, I mean, China has two weapons.
Mhm.
One is a military force, and one is a economic force.
Mhm.
The, uh, After pandemic, they can uh, invest in Philippine companies, and
Mhm.
that is a economic force.
Mhm.
West Philippine Sea.
Mhm.
They have already Article Island. That is economic, no, military force. The I afraid China want to control Philippines, all of Philippines.
Okay, so we actually I was able to get what you are saying. If
I
I'm
think
correct.
leverage, or is that correct? China is going to use the pandemic as a leverage.
That it
Yes,
has a stronghold in the Philippines.
Okay, okay.
Yes, he's saying, I think, that China can control both military or economic. And I think what they're doing now during the pandemic is controlling economically. Is that right, Koji-san?
yes, yes.
Thank you, Koji-san, for that good question. I I think as I have mentioned earlier, China's been very strong, been very pushy, especially for the businesses that are currently in the Philippines right now. And in fact, as you said, they have established an island of the previous islands or even buildings that were utilized by other companies have been utilized by the Chinese businessman right now. It is a stronger force. We all agree to that. And I think even Filipino businesses recognize that. And I think the thing there is, again, we have to go back to enforcement of our business laws. We have to go back to the equality and treatment of nationalities, whether Filipinos, Chinese, Japanese, and respect would be the operative word. Unless G has something to say.
Oh yeah. Just whether China will use this pandemic to their advantage is entirely up to them. But the thing is, we still have our laws in place. Just because there's a pandemic, it doesn't mean that we are going to welcome all sorts of investments. We still have what do you call this? We still have other laws in place before they could do that. Number one, I think Koji-san, if China wanted to control everything, there are still limitations according to Philippine law. So they can't do that just because there's a pandemic. Because number one, our government is still operative. So before they come in, they will have to be filtered by the certain government agencies, so on and so forth. So there is a threat, of course, because China has always had its eyes on the West Philippine Sea. Okay, but the Philippines is not taking anything lightly. That's what I'm saying. Just because it's the pandemic, nothing. We are taking everything seriously, and of course we should, because it's our territory, it's our sovereignty, and we should defend it at any time, even during the pandemic.
Okay.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Koji-san?
No. Okay. Already. Okay. It's not today's discussion, but do you know the electricity company that is a joint corporate with Chinese company? The China electricity switch they can control in China. They can shut down all electricity in
Okay.
Philippines.
Yeah.
Please.
I heard when you spoke about the electricity, I heard about the allegations that the National Grid Corporation is being controlled by Chinese, and I mean even the operations of electricity in the Philippines could be controlled by Chinese, and at any time the Chinese authorities may hamper the vital utility that is electricity, and I think that is something to fear, especially for Filipinos and those who are in the Philippines. But they have assured that it could not happen. But I think again we should not be complacent with what they are saying, and that we have to always look into the effectivity of the laws, the effectiveness of the people, and we should have a stronger hold of the vital industries like electricity and water. And in fact, the water system, there was even a question also, like in the Kaliwa Dam project and in the Chico River project. Those are projects that are based on concessions with Chinese companies also, and it has even raised some eyebrows also for Filipino nationalists, because the contract is favorable to China rather than to the Filipinos. Again, these are we have to go back to the vital industries, and that the Constitution, while the Constitution exists and not changed, we are protected under our constitutional system, and that should be respected even by the Supreme Court, and everyone being the supreme law of the land.
I think Koji-san is afraid that eventually China will have too much control of our vital resources like electricity
Yes.
and power,
Yes.
right? Yeah, and I think
Yes.
that's a valid point. If we are not careful, someday we will wake up and they're already controlling all of us because of these vital resources. Thank you so much, Koji-san. We are
Thank you.
running out of time. So there's another question from YouTube. Both of you can answer. This is from Mr. Jude Marcelino. His question is, how will Indonesia's support on Hague ruling help Philippines over its claim in South China Sea? I think we also talked about this earlier. Go ahead. Who wants to go first? Attorney or
Okay, I think I have to answer that particular question. When Indonesia used decision arbitration, the decision of the PCA on the issue of the Philippines and China in the actions or against the actions of China in the South China Sea, it strengthens the Philippines' position on the issue in South China Sea, and that it creates a a legal stronghold, a rules-based stronghold in international law that it has to be respected. And while the sanctions between China and the Philippines are only applicable to them, it can be utilized by the by the international tribunal when a conflict has to be resolved. On that basis, a particular rule has been established, and that the consistency in international law has been established. So this really works for the Philippines, and that it is a call for China that hey, you have to comply with this, and tribunals are also forewarned to resolve the issues that may go or may come before them, that there is a prior ruling in favor of the Philippines.
Mhm. Attorney Christie, would you like to add to that?
Well, basically, it's an ally. We earned an ally. Since we are still in the process of enforcing what is due to us, I think we need all the help we can get. That's especially in the international community. Remember that Indonesia is also part of the ASEAN group. So if ever we are in need of some sort of maybe push, motivation, international motivation, or some sort of help, I think that's a great contribution. The fact that we have Indonesia on our side.
I agree. So we have a new ally, a new claimant, using the ruling that was for us.
They are not new claimants. We have the conflict has been existing for so many years now, except that China has been very strong or very aggressive, and this
Solely, yeah.
has reached this far. And so I think China has to be reminded about that.
That's
But
true. The question is how. Well, thank you so much, Attorney Dean and Attorney Christie, and thank you for the questions, Koji-san and Mr. Marcelino from YouTube. So let's now move on to the next part of our program. Ms. Roma? Ms. Roma, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Okay, so I
There
was
you go.
listening. Okay, so if you are wondering why there's so many mainland Chinese nationals taking up residence all over the Philippines these days, it's because many of them have been brought here by Philippine offshore gaming operators, or POGOs, the online casino industry that may soon overtake the business outsourced processing, or BPO sector. It's indeed a very useful and a very informative discussion. But now let me share with you some helpful words to expand your vocabulary. So from our discussion, we have 3 useful vocabularies. So let's have the first one. The first is diplomatic. This is a word that means concerned with the art of, and practice of conducting negotiations between nations. Second one is the word bilateral, which means affecting reciprocally 2 nations or parties. And lastly, paramount, which means, just give me 1 second here. Paramount, which means superior to all others. To our dear viewers, especially to our Japanese students watching us, the more words you know, the more clearly and powerfully you think, and the more ideas you will invite into your mind. So that's it for our vocabularies. Now let's have final messages from our guests. Let's hear some words from our dear guests. So let's start with Attorney Christie for the final message. Attorney, you are on mute.
First, I'd like to thank Grand Line. Grand Line is correct, right? Grand Line.
Yes, Attorney.
Okay, I'd like to thank Grand Line for hosting this event and for having me. This is a great opportunity for everybody to learn something new, especially that we have technology in our homes right now, so we can learn while we're at home. And secondly, I would like to just tell everybody, not just the Filipinos, but our audience as well, that in this pandemic, we still have to be vigilant of certain actions of people, countries, governments. We have to always be updated with the latest happenings and the latest events. It pays to be vigilant. It pays to be paranoid, not just in health, but in also in politics, so that we would know how to act on it. And if not, we would know how to properly address it through our government.
Mhm.
Yes, and thank you, and I wish everyone would have a good evening.
Yes. Thank you so much, Attorney Christy. Now let's also have Attorney Rodel.
Yes, I would like to thank Grand Line for this opportunity that we're able to share our opinions about our ideas on certain issues that are really pressing today. And I think there are some few things that I am reminded of with today's topics. And I think number one is that we are reminded as Filipinos that the Philippines is a beautiful country, that we need to protect it, that no matter what nationality or what kind of people or businesses that would come in here, we have to value Filipino ingenuity, creativity, and its ability. And we have to believe in every Filipino. And also the primacy of the laws, Philippine laws, respect for the Constitution, respect for even the simple laws of crossing the pedestrian lane. We have to observe that. And that is a reminder also for Chinese people, Japanese people, any ordinary Filipino should observe that. And law enforcement should be strengthened. That no matter how small the law is or the impact of the law is, as compared to international crimes that may be brought by POGO, for instance, or whatever. Again, we have to strengthen our enforcement, our mechanisms, so that each person who violates the law should be punished. Number three, in international relations and in the concessions that we enter as a state or in the agreements that we enter into as a people, we always have to value that respect. Respect for the words that we mention or we state, respect to the agreements that we enter into, pacta sunt servanda in international law, respect for every Filipino. And I think that is one thing that we always celebrate. Filipinos respect each other and known for our hospitality, even to the nationals of other states. I think,
Wow.
thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Attorney Rodel. Absolutely correct. So let's also have Mr. Takabuchi. Mr. Takabuchi, for your final message. I guess he's on mute.
You have to unmute him. There you go.
So, Mr. Takabuchi, let's have your message.
Yeah, thank you for today's invitation. I worked at in Philippines from 2015 to 2017. But now I'm in Japan. If this Corona GCQ clear, I will go back to Philippines to start working. I want to work for Philippine people because I love Philippine people. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Takabuchi. You're always welcome here in the Philippines. And of course, may also have a message from my guest co-host, Ms. Florence.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Roma. So I think what we got today is a balanced and objective discussion of the issues surrounding the Philippine-China relations. As you know, it's a very sizzling topic currently because of POGOs and the South China Sea, the coronavirus. So China is a very controversial friend of the Philippines. So what I can say is, I think Mr. Koji-san has a point when he said that we have to be wary, of how much China is now controlling a lot of our vital resources. Of course, there are laws that protects us. There's a constitution that protects us. But if we are not careful, there are many ways to colonize or to conquer a nation. And we've seen that happen all around the world. So I think that won't happen to us. It starts with a discussion, and I am thankful for Grand Line for this venue, as Dean Rodell and Attorney Christie said, that there's a venue for us to discuss, and the people listening to us can maybe learn from it as well, because I certainly did learn a lot today in this discussion. So thank you, Grand Line, and thank you, Ms. Roma.
Thank you so much.
All our speakers today.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ms. Florence. Well, this is already our 5th online salon, and it's been a lot of learnings and discussions. So with amazing people and outstanding people like you. And thank you so much. This is such an honor, of course, and great privilege for me to be discussing with all of you. And so this is another day of very informative discussion, and with all of you watching us right now. So we hope you learn as much we did from our speakers. So thank you so much for our guests for today, and to everyone who joined us, including, of course, the technical staff. This will not be possible without each of you. And of course, we're looking forward to seeing you again on our next online salon. And thank you for watching us. And please don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And Ms. Florence, for the thought of the day.
Okay. So as we end this session, we would like to leave you with this thought of the day by Anne O'Hare McCormick, a Pulitzer Prize journalist who wrote extensively about World War II. She said, "Today, the real test of power is not the capacity to make war, but the capacity to prevent it." Again, this is Florence.
And this is Roma. Stay safe, everyone. Goodbye.